Physicochemical effects of vaping on the adolescent oral environment. I chose this topic because over the past few years, I've seen a lot of my friends begin vaping, and I wanted to learn more about how it could impact them. So before we begin, I want to show you a couple images of various vape flavors. Here we have a root beer flavor, a dill pickle flavor, a peanut butter flavor, and even a chicken and waffles flavor of vape, which is actually sold out on this website. So vapes were originally created as a healthier alternative to smoking, but cigarettes have no flavors. They have relatively boring branding, and vapes have fun names and colors, and like Geek Bar, Spaceman, and obviously fun flavors. So why exactly is this the case? So the reason is, despite federal and state regulations prohibiting people under the ages of 21 or 18 from purchasing these items, vape companies use marketing strategies that appeal to many kids, intentional or not. Because of this, it becomes important to study the effects on the demographic that they target. So for a bit of context, e-cigarettes or vapes, we all know what they are. E-cigarettes come in over 7,000 different available flavors, many containing harmful compounds. Over the past decade, vaping has been on the rise. Vaping is highly prevalent in youth. According to the CDC, in 2022, over 2.5 million US middle and high schoolers reported using e-cigarettes. So some of the most important and recognizable components of vapes are nicotine and the flavorings. So flavors, like the ones I showed you before, make vapes more appealing, especially to adolescents. However, the flavors themselves can be detrimental. They can have direct physiological effects. Flavorings can disrupt the oral microbiome, shifting the balance between beneficial and harmful bacteria. Another ingredient, nicotine, has a role beyond addiction in oral health. It has been known to constrict oral blood vessels, reduce saliva production, and create a drier and overall more disease-prone oral environment. These chemicals interact with the changing and especially sensitive system in adolescents. Adolescents differ biologically from adults in the oral environment. Due to puberty, they have differences in fat, muscle, and skeletal structure. Additionally, they have distinct diets and behaviors, such as consuming more sugar. They have distinct illicit substance abuse habits, and often lower hygiene. Due to this, vaping may disrupt development and healing in adolescent mouths more than adults. So given increased vaping in youth, schools and local organizations have begun to seek accessible and practical health tools to measure the effects, and oral health is part of this. Current dental testing isn't specific enough to the effects of vaping, and so due to all of this, there's a need for localized testing strategies to guide public health and policy. So given these effects and the lack of adolescent-specific data, I initially posed the research question, how does chronic vaping affect saliva pH and oral environment among adolescents? So to explore this question, I conducted a review of the relevant literature from the field, and this revealed myriad concerns, such as degradation of oral tissues, specific harms from flavoring and nicotine, and difficulty in measuring these things accurately or affordably. So to begin the research process, I first wondered what the general effects of vaping were due to the harshness of the aerosol. This led me to a study Chikanska et al., who found the aerosol impairs salivary enzymes, which in turn affects digestion. Additionally, it increases calcium in saliva, which possibly indicates leaching from teeth and dental erosion. Similarly, another study by Pushalkar et al. Found chronic exposure to aerosols changes plaque distribution and weakens immune defenses. This is likely due to chemical heat interactions and oxidative stress in the mouth while using the vape. So after my investigation of the aerosol, I wanted to learn more about the effects of the major components within the aerosol, and this led me to investigate nicotine not for its addictive properties, but instead for its direct physiological effects. This led me to another study by Malhotra et al. In their study of nicotine and periodontal tissues. According to Malhotra, nicotine is a vasoconstrictor, meaning that it reduces blood and salivary flow within the mouth. It exacerbates oral disease-related inflammation, and it promotes overproduction of cytokines and NETs, which are linked to cancer. Additionally, nicotine is linked to dry mouth or xerostomia, which inhibits digestion and is just generally uncomfortable. They also found, when I looked more into chemical effects, I found another study by Holiday et al., which found that nicotine e-liquids actually lower pH within the mouth. This destabilizes existing bacteria, potentially allowing harmful bacteria to move in and causes microbial imbalances and diseases. So in my investigation of these effects of pH, I also found that flavoring agents can be responsible for reductions as well. Flavorings can contain acids directly, like citric or malic acid, malic acid, which directly increase oral acidity. Some flavors have also been known to cause acid reflux, which also worsens mouth pH. The acidity led me to wonder what the effects were on microorganisms, as many have certain pH tolerances. This led me to another study by Christian et al., who conducted a study on the different flavors, such as cinnamon or menthol, on oral streptococcal communities. They found that cinnamaldehyde, which is the key aldehyde in the cinnamon flavor, damages bacterial morphology and integrity. This can contribute to cell death, which reduces biofilm formation in beneficial oral streptococcal communities. So in my research, I also wondered what the best way to measure these effects would be on a community scale. And in this, I'm defining community or local level as a sort of resource-constrained environment with a lack of high-level laboratory equipment, purchasing power, and expertise. High-end lab tools like atomic absorption spectrophotometers, which is used in quantifying certain properties like protein in the Lowry assay, aren't accessible in most communities. However, there are alternatives that exist. Baliga, Shaila, and Dawes et al., all sources from my literature review, tested with pH meters and colorimetric assays, and were able to quantify certain biomarkers like salivary flow rate or pH with basic equipment, which would allow for basic diagnostics of adolescence. So this gives a basic idea that measurement could be viable, but there's a need for standardization and ethical protocols. Adapting for communities where resources, expertise, and sample handling capabilities are limited necessitates further exploration of practical solutions. So, considering the literature review led me to revise my research question to how does chronic vaping affect adolescent oral environment, and how could this best be measured on a local level? So, on to methods. So, I was originally inspired by Chikanska et al. Study, which I mentioned earlier, in which she recruited groups of, there was a cigarette smoking group, an e-cigarette smoking group, and a control group, and she tested all of them for like different physicochemical effects, and then compared them using statistical analyses to see how this was impacting them. So with this, I wanted to do something similar with pH level, calcium content, and protein in saliva of adolescents. So I was going to recruit adolescents from this community and then perform a similar test, but I faced significant obstacles that denied replicating such an approach. For example, there was a lack of centrifuges or other advanced equipment, insufficient safeguards for disposal of biohazardous materials, sample disposal, and this is like in the form of like trained personnel and equipment. Lack of ethical infrastructure, no access to external labs or funding, and all of this made actual saliva collection infeasible. So as such, the method was adjusted to consider practicality of measurement approaches in contexts without access to high-level lab equipment. I focused on the feasibility of total protein quantification as a biomarker due to the commonality of it that I found in the professional conversation, as well as relative cost and time constraints. So in this, I tested total protein quantification essentially to see how accurate I could be with limited expertise and lack of advanced laboratory equipment, and draw conclusions on feasibility based on that. So this version is less based on Chikanska et al. Study and is more similar to a feasibility study such as those done by Holliday et al. With e-cigarette cessation in patients with periodontitis. So for the actual measurement of total protein in saliva, there's three major ways that you can do it. The first is the bisynchronenic acid assay, the second is the Lowry assay, and the third is the biuret test. Ultimately, I decided on the bisynchronenic acid assay, or BCA assay. The biuret test is generally considered unsuitable for this situation, as it's used more for higher protein concentrations. The Lowry assay I decided against because there's one of the reagents is a little hazardous and difficult to dispose of, as well as there's a difficult time component. So I decided on the BCA assay as it was safer and more doable in resource scarce situations. So for my final methods, I used a Pierce BCA assay kit on artificial saliva samples. So for the purposes of this presentation, I'm not going to delve deep into the chemistry of the reaction, but I can give you some basic steps of my methods. So I took a working solution that changes color based on the protein concentration of the sample that it's combined with. I combined that with the artificial saliva samples and incubated that at 37 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes to allow the reaction to occur. Then absorbance was measured at 562 nanometer wavelength level in the spectrophotometer, basically testing how much the color has actually changed as a result. A calibration curve was created with 5 standards ranging from 0.5 to 4 milligrams per liter bovine serum albumin, or BSA protein. It's a kind of cow protein commonly used in lab exercises. Then 5 unknown samples with predetermined protein concentrations were also measured and interpolated via the calibration curve to test how accurate the BCA assay was. With this, I predicted around a 10% error from the actual values, and I anticipated more deviation in low concentration samples due to human error and equipment limitations. So for results. Results were not quite what I had expected. There was moderate alignment with expected values. High concentration samples were actually inaccurate, whereas low concentrations were more precise, which is the opposite of what I had hypothesized. One sample, the 4 milligrams per liter BSA sample, went completely undetected, potentially due to interference or limitations in detection at higher protein concentrations. So this showed the basic functionality of the assay, but it suggests variability and sensitivity across the working range of the assay. I also calculated the error, which revealed measurement limitations in high ranges, as you can see over there. And my hypothesis about error was actually pretty close. Average error was 12.5% compared to the hypothesized 10%, excluding the infinite error. So, implications. One of the most important implications is that basic protein assays are possible in low resource settings, but may not always provide precise measurements. There are limitations in the working range of the assay, and they may lack precision without trained personnel. So this begs the question if performing these is cost effective due to the need for training and further safety management, which obviously incurs further costs. It also raises doubts about protein as a biomarker. Difficulty in accurately quantifying it under non-ideal conditions suggests that it may not actually be best. Findings by Baliga et al., another source from my professional conversation in Lit Review, suggests that pH may actually be a better biomarker as it can reliably predict things like periodontal disease, but there are still gaps in coverage of potential health problems. So, limitations in future research. As previously mentioned, this study faced significant limitations. This impacted various aspects of the methodology, particularly in the accuracy of protein quantification and the ability to test additional physicochemical properties. However, the inability to collect actual saliva from adolescents was the biggest limitation. With more equipment, funding, time, and safety and ethical guidelines, collection of actual saliva would have been possible. So, actual saliva, like Chikanska et al. Obtained, would have been ideal as well because artificial saliva lacks the chemical complexity of human samples, and so therefore it's a little more difficult to draw conclusions on feasibility based off of that. Additionally, it would have added a whole other dimension to the project, as I could have directly assessed the effects of these things in adolescents and gained insight on potential health problems. So for future research should use real adolescent saliva to capture the full effects, as previously mentioned. Ideally, metrics, like physicochemical metrics, would also include pH, calcium, phosphate count, microbial content, and salivary flow rate. Future research should also explore a closer look at financial feasibility, training models for schools, and ethical sample handling procedures. So thank you for watching, and here are my sources. Are there any questions? I didn't get quite that far. As I mentioned before, when I was researching, I found that cinnamon and menthol could be especially harmful, but and there's so many flavors that it's hard to test all of them. No, actually, so the standards, I believe, if I remember correctly, were created using the bovine serum albumin, and then I think the unknowns that I made were with an entirely different type of protein to sort of try to account for, that extra error from not being able to use the same kind of protein from humans. So, yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, I have been able to share it with a few peers, and I've definitely had some reactions from them. But, I mean, like, the difficult part about prevention and all of these things is that, when you're just telling people these things, it doesn't always get to them, like, all the way. So it needs to be experienced by some people, which is the unfortunate truth. Sorry?
What
surprised me the most? Didn't expect to find. Well, as previously mentioned, like when I was actually performing the assay, I didn't expect for like the errors to be like less at like the more precise or like the lower levels of protein. I expected it to be, or did I say that right? I expected there to be a higher error at the lower level of protein, and then a lower error at like the higher level of protein. So seeing the opposite of that was pretty unexpected. I didn't encounter anything that's like directly staining, but I think I mentioned it, that it can actually vaping can decrease like the formation of biofilm. And so when there's less biofilm, it's easier for other things to stain teeth. So. On oral health? Well, I focused mainly on oral health because comparatively, like relative to like impacts on like the cardiovascular system or like, like your lungs, like there's comparatively little research on the oral environment, so that's why I decided to go towards that. Anything else?